Great. Well, thank you so much for that lovely welcome. First of all, let me welcome you to Mansfield. You know that Oxford is one of the oldest universities in the world. We happen to be apparently number one in the world. You're all researchers, and you know that figures sometimes don't tell the whole story, and we mustn't put too much emphasis on league tables. But according to the league tables, we're number one, so that's nice. Next year we might be not, so who knows. Oldest university, but this is the youngest college, okay? It doesn't look very young in some of the old buildings because it was here as a hall. We called it a hall, but officially became a college only in 1995. The buildings were moved here in 1870s, or built here in 1870s. They were moved from the community moved from Birmingham. So we're quite proud of being the youngest and the oldest, if you like. We try to be the most outreaching to the community because we're young. We don't have to. We make our own traditions, and they're new traditions. And you can see, because you had to walk around the back, that there's lots of things happening in the college. We're building new buildings, we're expanding, we're developing. And the new building is very exciting, and it reflects some of the things I want to talk about, because it's going to be a new Institute of Human Rights. And many universities have centres to study human rights. Oxford did not, and now it does. And the whole thing about building centres and developing institutes is about bringing a focus on research, bringing different people from different backgrounds together so they can push forward on the research. And you know, as researchers, that one of the ways to do good research now is through collaboration, through concentration, through focus. And that's one of the themes I want to talk about. But first of all, let me repeat what dear Professor Kim Sung-hee said, is that I have a very good relationship with Korea, with South Korea. I've been there, I had a wonderful time. She organized it, Dennis and I, Professor Noble and I were there together. And it's been a deep kind of friendship that has been maintained. And Oxford has also had a friendship with South Korea. You probably heard about it, but even from the 200 years ago, we built the library of Korean books and literature. So we have something like 40,000 books in our library, which are in Korean language and literature. And I think one of the vice-chancellors gave 400 books, I think, from the Chosun dynasty recently.
Dr. John Hood.
That's right. And one of the reasons why the relationship between Oxford and South Korea is growing so much, always full of energy, why you're here, is actually Sung-hee herself. She's actually helped us to develop that relationship. So she's doing a fantastic job in that. We need to recognize that. And when Dennis and I were there, we were developing links particularly with Seoul, but with other universities, Yonsei, Korea University. We developed the links that led to the first undergraduate, I think it's a graduate degree in Korean studies. So we have a degree in Korean studies. Not every country has a degree in its own subject here, so it's kind of special and important. I think we have 13 or 14 Korean nationals in our academic staff, and we get lots and lots of Korean students here, as you can imagine. I think well over 100 a year. One of the largest groupings, probably in the top 10 or 15 countries in terms of national groupings, and we have 150 countries who send students here. So it's a good, deep relationship. So you're following in the footsteps, okay? Or you're walking on a path that is already there. So what I've been asked to speak about is a little bit about research, which I'm going to do, and then I'm going to talk a little bit, or at least put some questions on the table. You can discuss with me if you like, I hope you will, about this very strange new future that Britain is entering. So first of all, let me talk a little bit about research, because you're all studying something that involves research. And pharmaceuticals is actually one of our biggest industries in Britain, and it is one that might be under threat from our breakup in the European Union. But it also gives you the chance to come in and build new relationships. That's the question. We don't know what will happen. But why is research so successful in Oxford? If you remember, we have a very good track record. Sometimes we measure it 47 Nobel Prize winners, 5 field winners, those are the top mathematicians, and 5 Balzan, that's the other big prize. So we have lots of prize winners. We have many, something like, when I did the research, something like 1 in 3 professors in other universities in England used to be from Oxford and Cambridge. So we produce very good future academics. And of course, many of them are also in all around the world. I always think of two or three fantastic things that Oxford discovered. One is, of course, penicillin, which you all know about. We didn't actually discover it. I don't know if they're going to see the actual pot where it was found.
We've got the pot, but we've just been in the building.
We've been in the building, so you know about that. And I hope you mentioned that what apart from applying it and developing it, the most wonderful thing Oxford did was to give it for free, not to license it. Can you imagine? If we'd licensed it, of course, we'd all be drinking champagne, you know. But the world would be much more unhappy. You know, there would be many more sick people because of the cost. The other thing that we didn't discover it here, but we created the kind of opportunity for it, is the World Wide Web. I always think that is a fantastic discovery. It was discovered by an Oxford graduate working in CERN, in a research institute, and he also gave it for free. And I can tell you the American, particularly the defense industry, were very keen to get hold of it and manage it. And again, the world would be incredibly different. So I always think those are two wonderful things that Oxford, in its contribution, and there are many other stories about it. But one of the reasons why we do well in research, I think, is first of all, we build curiosity. Okay, we have a teaching approach that encourages our students as much as possible to think for themselves. Okay, and we had a very nice meeting with the governor of Daegu, Professor Wu, Dr. Wu, and we actually discussed differences in teaching styles, and we discussed how people learn in different cultures. And Dr. Wu was very interested in the Oxford way, which is to have just small groupings, sometimes 2, sometimes 4 people in a room with the professor, discussing very, very directly. No sleeping at the back, because I can see you, okay? No under preparation, because I might ask you what you think. You know, if you can say, oh, I didn't, it's a big group, you can escape. So it develops, you quickly learn that to survive you have to study, and I don't want you to remember it, I want you to argue, to explain what is the argument. So we hope that when people leave here, they can think on their own 2 feet, we say in English, okay? You can think for yourself. And it means whatever job you do, and we do all kinds of jobs. Some people will be prime ministers, and some people will be professors, and some people will be in the government, in civil service, but there can be all kinds of people. One of my friends takes photographs. He studied with me at Balliol. He takes photographs of plants, okay? And he studied history, so very unusual. But hopefully he's asking questions of, you know, what makes the right picture. So first of all, curiosity. Secondly, concentration. You have to bring people together, and that's why this institute is very interesting for us. And we have so many institutes starting here. It's become, you can't keep up, can you? All the different centres and institutes that are starting up. But they are successful. I want to mention just two because we don't have too much time. But one, which I think is amazing, is called the Martin Institute. And it was set up by James Martin, who made a lot of money very quickly when the dot-com boom was going on. He sold his shares and he gave us something like 75 million. And he said, I want a centre which thinks about the future. Okay? Now, if you're an academic, if you're a historian, you can study the past. You find the books and the documents. If you're a scientist, you go into the laboratory and you experiment. So thinking about the future, it sounds a bit odd. But actually, it's incredibly useful. So they study aging, they study the changes in population, they study the way our brains are changing because we're using new technology. We think, or you think actually, I'm probably in the older generation, you think very differently from me. You operate differently. I still like to get my book out and read it. You probably have no books, I don't know. My kids don't want any books. I'm very worried because I've got lovely books. Who am I going to give them to? So they think about thinking, about climate change, about the Arctic regions and animals. It's a wonderful institute. Can you imagine? 15, 20 years ago, nobody would have thought of doing something like that. And they're producing fantastic reports, which the United Nations are using. They're doing something big on cybersecurity. And we're all very worried about that. You heard about the Russian involvement in the American elections. So they're doing absolutely the top work in the world on cybersecurity. So that's one institute which I think is fantastic. I think the Human Rights Institute will be very interesting because we want to recreate some cases and experiment and get students and graduates and professors to act out some of the cases to see where the problems were. Why were people who were guilty of crimes against humanity, why did they not get found out? Why did the case fall down? What can we do better? The other institute I want to mention, because I think is quite relevant to South Korea, is the Oxford Internet Institute. Now this is unusual because it's not studying technology, machines, how to make things, how to improve things, but it's studying the impact of the machines on us as human beings, as families, as individuals. How is it making us happy? It's a big issue in South Korea. It's a big issue now in Britain. How does a parent, many of you, all of you maybe, will become parents. How does a parent manage the use of technology? How do your parents manage your use of technology, or how did they? Of course, you're all grown-ups now, but so this is quite interesting, the social impact and so on. They started by looking at the fact that 70% could use machines and 30% couldn't. And that 30% were losing out. They were getting poorer. They were not getting information. They were making mistakes. Well, that's changed now. Everybody, some of the older people are brilliant at using machines, so that's not a problem. But they're actually looking at now, and then there was this question about whether they were making us more violent or this or that. Those issues remain, but now they're looking at the social interactions. So I think those are kinds of institutes that are very, very, very interesting. I'm not going to talk about pharmaceuticals, of course, because you've had a wonderful talk and a tour, and I don't know anything about it, really, except your products. I use your products, I'm afraid. So what I want to talk about is, I've talked about collaboration, I've talked about concentration, and I've talked about curiosity. Actually, I probably haven't talked about collaboration, because what is now clear in our world is that an individual working alone in a laboratory or in a library probably can't make a big difference. In the 17th century, there was a philosopher called Montaigne who went up a tower and wrote wonderful books which changed the way we thought about things. And that's probably where the idea of the ivory tower probably came from. In English we say, working, these academics, they're very, very strange. Look at Dennis. Look at these people. Look at me. They're strange people. They're cut off. But actually, no, the success of Dennis is actually by collaborating with his colleagues in South Korea and all around the world. He's going to America to work at the Mayo Clinic. So it's all about collaboration. Curiosity I talked about, collaboration and concentration in these institutes. And now I want to just talk a little bit about the very strange decision that was made last summer when Britain, which is an important player in the European Union, decided to leave. And the impact that we're all worried about on our research, because it's going to affect the collaboration and the concentration. It may also affect the curiosity. But the collaboration, because we have all these arrangements within the European Union for scientists to collaborate and cooperate, to bid together for big research grants, to travel and stay at each other's institutions. There might be now rules on visas and staying and grant applications and so on. And the European Union itself has huge sums of money which it only gives to its own citizens. So if we're not officially part of that, we'll have to do some kind of deal. Last year, I think Oxford got 66 million euros from, or maybe it's pounds, I can't remember, from the European Research Council, which is the senior research body of the European Union. We were the top, we were the top or almost the top winner of this, and this is all now under threat. But it's also all the other collaborative work that we do, which is at risk, and that's going to affect, the chemist researchers as well, if you like, your international colleagues. So why I don't know how much you read about it. Probably there was a little bit of news, but for us it's obviously a big story, and it's a very big story for Oxford University. And actually so big that we've set up a whole team to work on it, to reassure the academics from Europe that they should stay here, that there's still a future, that we'll look after them, that their pensions will be guaranteed, that their children's futures will be secure. People get worried about everything so quickly. So what explains that? What explains this strange decision? One of my friends who works with me on the Europaeum is a very famous economist, Will Hutton. He's at Oxford, and he said it's an extraordinary act of self-harm, okay, in modern British, modern European life, or even international life. So we have to kind of think hard about why we do this when the costs, the risks seem to be so great. Well, the explanation goes back, there are small reasons to explain it. A bad campaign, a bad argument, people angry at the elite everywhere in the world, perhaps I'm sure in South Korea as well. People are angry at the leaders. You've had to replace your president. So people are very angry. South Africa yesterday, the president also probably should have been replaced, but won through probably all kinds of back deals. He just won, President Zuma. Every country you go, Venezuela, even in America, there is a lot of anxiety now. There's a lot of anger around the world about leadership and about behavior and about corruption. So that's one thing that we all kind of share. And there is, in England, in Britain, but particularly in England, a tradition of independence, going right back to probably 1066 or something, when the French came, since that we've kind of had this feeling of independence and relative success. It's the success of winning wars and perhaps having too big an empire. There's a nostalgia. And this is all circulating around Britain, and we've never quite come to grips with it. And so there's that feeling that you can bring out when people are unhappy, when the economy is not doing well, when people don't like the leadership, when the leaders make mistakes and bad campaigning. It all mixes up and created this very, very, very narrow decision to leave the European Union, which we call Brexit, okay? British exit. And we really don't know what the future holds. And actually, so many people were so confused about the arguments because they were very, very complex. And it was very silly to have a single vote in-out because it's so complicated that many people have changed their minds since then. But not in the ways that you think. Some people who voted to stay have now said, well, we should leave because the majority thought we should leave, and we've made a decision, and let's just do it. Because we want to go back to live, our lives. We don't want any more politics. And other people who voted to leave are saying, gosh, we never realized that if this would happen and that would happen, and our currency would go down, it'd be more expensive to have holidays in Spain, and our friendship with somebody in Bulgaria is affected, and all kinds of things. We want to stay. So there's all kinds of confusion going on. And actually, when there was an election, general election recently, the result was very different from the result of the referendum. Of course, it wasn't a referendum, it was about a general election. But the people who should have led the exit did less well, and the people who led the staying in, or the sort of staying in, did much better. I always think people actually know better than politicians quite often. I have been a politician. I think politics is very important. We need good politicians. But quite often, there's a lot of wisdom in people. And one of the problems that politicians have is we know better. These people, they don't understand. And they're often wrong. So, I've welcomed you to Mansfield, talked a little bit about Oxford. I've told you why I think special things for research matter: concentration, curiosity, collaboration. I've told you about the kind of institutes that we're building up here, which are looking at the future, looking at what's happening in the world today. It's very important. And then I've tried to explain a little bit about the confusion we're in. We're in a confusion state. And for a country that I'm quite proud of our country. I think everyone can have a good pride, not a kind of exclusiveness pride, but a good pride of good things that we do as a community, as citizens. And I think Britain has done many good things and stands for good things and is welcoming. Not everybody, but we try to be. But we're in a state of confusion. So you come at an interesting time. I'm going to stop now and see if you want to ask any questions. Is that okay?
특히 아까 질문 안 한 학생들께 질문 좀 해주십시오. Okay, any questions, please?
Don't be shy. Who's brave? Someone be brave. And then when someone asks a question, then others will do it. Yeah?
When people have different opinions, what do you think the most important thing to make one
Consensus. Agreement.
The agreement.
Yeah. No, this is a beautiful question because it's a question for democracies, isn't it? And if you don't get agreement, if you don't have agreement, then you can't actually kind of move forward. So it's actually a thing that I'm trying to bring some experts together to think about it. One country that has developed a very clever, successful way is Germany. Because Germany had such a bad experience in the 30s. And remember that Hitler came to power through democracy means initially. Once he got there, he grabbed power, he cut out opponents and so on and so forth. So the system in Germany is full of what we call checks and balances. So nobody can make too many decisions too quickly. So how do we get, if there's difference, how do we get agreements? Well, I think you have to educate and discuss, and what they call it corporatism. They try to get different groups together around the table and to discuss it. One of the problems in Britain in the 80s, in the 1980s, was fighting between trade unions, workers, and managers. And it created a lot of strikes and strifes. And actually Mrs. Thatcher, who was a chemist, a pharmaceutical person here, was the Prime Minister then, and she had to kind of somehow create some continuity out of it. And I think she actually didn't build consensus, she fought in order to create change. So sometimes, you don't want to build consensus, but by and large, consensus is something that we want. And how do we do it? We keep discussing, we keep talking, and I think you involve people around the table. I think one of the reasons why the Brexit vote happened was because people in the South, who were doing very successfully, started to forget about people in the North who were getting, we say, left behind, because their industries were collapsing. Everything seems to be built in China. And so our shipbuilding and our manufacturing had collapsed. This is over 10, 20, 30 years. And people living in London, having good salaries, maybe even getting bonuses, somehow, they knew about the situation, but they didn't listen. They didn't act. So that was a big failure. And my own positive wish out of the Brexit vote is that there is a big lesson for the elite, for the politicians. Listen, travel, be more aware. Yeah. I haven't told you my own little story about Britain leaving Europe. It's the idea that sometimes there can be a mistaken decision, but it can be helpful to everybody else. So maybe by leaving Europe, by in a sense sacrificing ourselves, we'll make the rest of Europe wake up, reform itself, and work better. Okay? But I don't think that's a deliberate thing. That's just sort of outcome.
Okay, 2 more questions, please. Okay, 아까 한 번째. Good.
Which characters do you think are needed to be a quality leader?
Very good question.
Yeah.
Very good question. Probably, following the last very good question, is probably something like humility. So that you do listen and you don't get carried away with your power and overreach. But actually, that isn't a good enough reason, a good enough quality. So, but if you think of people who had humility, I think of someone, because I came originally from India, I think of Gandhi. And the interesting thing about Gandhi was if he'd walked into the room, before he was famous, I mean now if he walked into the room you'd recognize him with his special dhoti, we call it, and his stick. But before that, you didn't notice him because he was quite small and he didn't sort of demand attention. Another person with humility is of course Mandela, and we all respect him. But I think you need something else. You need a bit of charisma. Yeah? And charisma is a bit dangerous because it can be, it can be carried away. So can we have good charisma and not bad charisma? I don't know. We have to discuss it. But there was a famous German sociologist called Weber, Max Weber, and he talked about the bureaucratization of democracy, how how, as society becomes more and more complicated, and you have more and more bureaucrats, which are not just the bureaucrats, but sort of administrators in society. You have administrators in your office, and you have to do administration at home. As we have to do more and more administration, then how do you get excited? How do you make change? You need somebody who can attract your attention, your support. So you need a little bit of charisma.
Okay. Because we have
One more?
lunch
One more.
open. Yeah, one more. Yeah, before we go. Yeah, very good.
As far as I know, there are two sides, a soft Brexit and hard Brexit.
Yeah.
So I want to know which side are you in favor of?
Which side do you think? I think I'm very much for soft Brexit. I'm for no Brexit.
Are there a consensus between those who are in favor of soft Brexit and those who are in favor of hard Brexit?
What do you think?
Not yet.
No, that's quite right. Because there are two different strategies. And actually, sometimes we don't quite know what we mean by soft and hard. Hard means leaving the whole European Union, leaving the market, leaving the customs union, and developing fresh relationships with America, Canada, South Korea, India. Some people say, can you not use your historical relations? It's not so easy, because a country like Australia, which still likes Britain very much, has a deeper relationship with China and with Japan and perhaps with South Korea. We're too far away. It's all about geography and geopolitics and so on and so forth. So that's the hard Brexit. The soft Brexit is somehow we stay inside the club. We're not a full member. We might be a part-time member or a probation member or or we might be like Norway, We get the economic benefits, but we can't say anything. Well, can you imagine Britain, of all countries, which is very bossy and very used to being always at the table, having to sit back and not say anything while all the decisions are made by Luxembourg and Liechtenstein and, Malta. It's going to be a kind of strange situation. So there are two sides. I think there's still people who think maybe just through the confusion we won't leave. And then there are people who say, hurry up. Let's forget, the European Union has been very damaging and so on. I think they're misguided. One problem that's come up is law. You see, we have so many laws made through the European Union, which we've been part of. They're not laws that are suddenly imposed on us. What are we going to do with all those laws? And what about the courts when they make new laws, many of which the lawyers like? So it's going to be very, very tricky. But that's the confusion. I said we are in a confused state. And we don't know about our leaders, because our current Prime Minister is very weak. And we don't know what other people want. And our Labour leader isn't very clear. He's not clear about his politics. So we're waiting for our humble, charismatic leader to emerge.
Yeah, just one more final question from
Please.
So I have one quick question.
Please. Not too hard, please.
The reactions to the Brexit are different by the provinces you briefly mentioned, but I wonder, I guess that the reaction to the Brexit is also different by generation. So I'm wondering how young people, especially the college students, react to. I think it's a bit too early to get a consensus, but just to
No, you highlight a very critical problem. I think what happened in the Brexit vote was to create a lot of divisions. So I talked a little bit about the north-south divide.
Yes.
And one can talk also about the rich-poor divide. And also one can talk about culture, because there are certain people who travel, who like to eat different foods, who like different musics and so on. Well, they're obviously going to be pro-European, pro-international. And there are others who, when they go abroad, they only want to eat English breakfast, maybe 3 times a day. So there's a cultural divide, there's a north-south divide, there's a rich-poor divide, and there's a young-old divide. And it seems that the young were something like 60% in favour of remaining, and the over 60s were more than 60% for leaving. And that might be to do with the nostalgia about the past. It might be to do with the sense of independence. It might be to do with the sense of, let's have a quiet life. We're still analysing it. But the problem is that everybody over 60 most probably goes to vote. So there's a much higher turnout, 70% turnout. But the younger people, under 25, under 28, are less likely to go to vote. Now this is changing, and did change in the referendum, and did change in the election. So maybe young people will get engaged, but they are saying, look, you're stealing our future. You people, who won't be around for very long, are stealing our future. So there's a potential problem.
It happened like in Korean politics.
Does it as well? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Wow, profound and fantastic lecture. Let's give a big hand.